Okay, let's talk about the situation between the United States and Iran. Tensions are escalating, and they're escalating fast. There's a massive military buildup happening in the Middle East. A lot of heated words are being thrown around, and it's got the whole world watching and asking one really important question. Right, let's just get straight to it. Is the United States really about to launch a military strike on Iran? To even begin to understand how we got to this point, we really need to unpack this complicated mix of diplomatic signals and very real threats that are defining this whole situation.
Probably the biggest challenge in trying to figure all this out is just how contradictory the messages coming out of Washington are. I mean, on one hand, you're hearing about peace talks, and on the other, it feels like the war drums are beating louder than they have in years.
Take this recent comment from President Trump, for instance. He says, good talks and a meaningful deal. That sounds pretty diplomatic, right? But then there's that last part. Otherwise, bad things happen. And that phrase, well, it carries some serious weight. It's like this thinly veiled threat that makes everything a lot more complicated. And this really just lays that contradiction out perfectly. While there are diplomats meeting, the U.S. is also putting together its largest concentration of air power in the region since the 2003 Iraq invasion. And we're talking about 2 full aircraft carrier groups, advanced air defense systems, tons of land-based planes. So the words might be saying diplomacy, but the actions, well, they're screaming preparation for conflict. So what about that meaningful deal the president mentioned? What does that even mean? Well, analysts have pointed out that nobody really knows for sure. The White House hasn't really laid out any specific terms, which leaves both Iran and, frankly, the rest of the world just guessing about what it would actually take to bring things back from the brink. Now, experts who are watching this closely think that any potential deal would have to be about way more than just the nuclear issue. The most likely demand? For Iran to completely give up its entire ballistic missile program. And this is a really crucial point because for the Iranian regime, analysts pretty much all agree that's an absolute non-starter. It just makes a peaceful, diplomatic solution seem that much harder to reach. So all of this brings us to the second part of what we're looking at today, the military option. With diplomacy on such shaky ground, we have to seriously consider what that alternative could actually look like. The scale of this buildup is just immense. It's not just a few planes and ships. We're talking about some of the most advanced military hardware in the entire U.S. arsenal. You've got entire carrier strike groups, B-2 stealth bombers, all positioned well within striking distance of Iran. And here's the critical takeaway from that. This isn't just for show. This force gives the Pentagon the actual capability to carry out a sustained weeks-long air war against targets inside Iran. The threat isn't just some abstract idea. The hardware is physically there, right now, to make it a reality. But look, a conflict isn't a one-way street, so for this next section, we have to ask the question. If the U.S. were to strike, what would Iran do? How would they respond? They might not be able to match the U.S. in a conventional fight, but that does not mean they're powerless. So how could Iran fight back? I mean, in a straight-up head-to-head conventional war, the United States has an overwhelming advantage. But that's not the kind of fight Iran would likely pick. Instead, most analysts expect them to go with a completely different strategy. And that strategy is what's known as asymmetrical conflict. This is a really key concept here. Instead of just meeting force with force, the whole goal is to exploit your opponent's weaknesses and inflict pain in unconventional ways, economically, politically, and by causing major strategic disruptions. And this is where Iran holds a very powerful card, the Strait of Hormuz. A staggering 20%, 1/5, of the entire world's oil supply passes through this one narrow waterway, and Iran can threaten to shut it down. They've already run live fire drills in the area, basically signaling to the world that they're willing to use this choke point as a major piece of leverage. This analysis from an expert really gets to the heart of it. Iran might not be able to defeat the U.S. military, but it is more than capable of inflicting real pain. And not just on American forces, but on the entire global economy by messing with trade and the flow of oil. Which brings us to the ultimate unknown. If the goal of a U.S. operation was, in fact, to topple the Iranian regime, what happens next? What comes after? History has shown us, especially in the Middle East, that when you remove a leader, you can create a huge power vacuum. And that can lead to incredible chaos and bloodshed, with consequences that are almost impossible to predict. Okay, so finally, let's look at the fourth piece of this puzzle, the political calculation happening back in the United States.
because ultimately any decision to go to war comes down to a really complex mix of domestic politics and old campaign promises.
And this really highlights the president's central political dilemma. I mean, his whole America First platform was built on ending expensive foreign wars like the ones in Iraq and Afghanistan. But at the same time, his bases often reacted pretty positively to shows of military force. As one expert put it, it's really an open question how they would react to a full-blown war with a major power like Iran. And that leaves us right here with this central, unresolved tension. Is the ultimate goal to keep a promise to end America's so-called endless wars, or are we actually watching the beginning of a brand new and potentially much more dangerous conflict? The signals are mixed, the stakes are undeniably global, and the answer, well, it's still anyone's guess.